Follow along as we paint this nice autumn tree with this one single brush and just a few really common colors. We're going to jump in and do it right now. What we start with is this, a photo reference, of course, but we're really going to concentrate on this part of the tree. From the top to about here, we want to get the masses of foliage and indications of the structure of the tree in between. This is the drawing layout, and it's really quite simple. It focuses on the masses of foliage that are there and the few indications of individual branches on that tree, a bit of the trunk and the branches that reach out into those foliage masses. And that's really the way we're going to start. We want to keep this looking organic and natural. We're going to use this one single half-inch flat brush to get this in, and that's all we're going to need. We'll use just 3 colors for this: cadmium orange, burnt sienna, and a little bit of ultramarine blue. And with those 3 colors, we'll be able to get actually the masses of foliage with light, the areas of darker foliage that are shade, indicate shade and shadow, and parts of the foliage that are deeper inside the tree. And then, of course, get the color of the trunk and the branches that support all of that foliage. And again, we'll be using this one single half-inch flat brush. Now the trick for this, and really any tree that you're going to be painting, is to really concentrate on the masses of foliage rather than the individual leaves and those smaller bits that we might find on any tree. We're going to start with the foliage. We're going to use our orange and our brown, our burnt sienna and ultramarine blue to get some of the darker areas, and again mass in those shapes, leaving holes in the foliage. As you can see, the masses of foliage are broken up with little areas where we can see through the foliage into the sky in the background, and we want to make sure we leave those, and we want a natural looking, organic looking shape. It may seem not the correct thing to do to use a brush like this, a flat brush, which is very angular and not organic looking. But we'll be using this in a particular way. We'll get some mass shape in, and then we'll correct it really by using the side of the brush. I'm starting with my bright orange, and that's the cadmium orange that I'm using. And again, I'm massing in this big shape, working up towards near those pencil lines that mark the outer contours of the shape. If I go over or I don't quite make that pencil line, it's okay. Again, my real objective here is to mass in a big shape, starting with that brighter orange color. And as I'm working at the edges, I turn and twist the brush, and I really use the side of the brush rather than the whole body of it to get some rough looking edges that might indicate where we're seeing a little bit of individual leaves or a few leaves together. And again, I'm just following a bit of the contours that I drew in with my pencil. I made those pencil lines a little heavier than I normally do so that you could see them as I was painting. And I'm keeping this very wet and fluid so that I can go back in just a minute and add some of those darker colors and darker values. It's a bit of a mass of foliage there and there. And now if I go back up into this area, this is where I started. I want to make sure it's still fluid. I can drop some water in if I need to make sure it's still nice and fluid. And now I'm going to pick up my burnt sienna, and I'm going to start placing that in areas that are sort of down and to the right because the light is up and to the left. And again, I can use the side of my brush, but that darker color starts to give us an indication of where we're looking at foliage that's not catching as much light or is actually down in deep shade. There's an area here which is actually in deep shade. And as I'm adding the burnt sienna, I'm adding more water. So I'm keeping that area, those areas, I should say, of that foliage all nice and fluid and wet. And that's going to allow me to work back in in this case with just a little bit of ultramarine blue. I want that to mix and mingle on the paper with the two colors I've already put in there, the burnt sienna and the cadmium orange. And those mixtures will darken and neutralize, and they'll start to look again like the shadier parts of that foliage. Now for the really darker parts, I'll get more of the burnt sienna, good bit of it, right up in here. There's a very dark area. And I'll put that on pretty strong, and I'll get a little bit of ultramarine blue and put that in there as well. So I get a really, really dark area of foliage sitting back in that area that's really shady. There's one here as well. And then down here. A bit more burnt sienna in this large mass shape up here, just to get a little bit of variety that looks like, again, changes in light and shade and shadow. And then, with my flat brush and a rag on which I can blot it, I can lift in some of these darker areas. I can lift color out where it looks like there might be part of the trunk of the tree working its way through and actually in front of those darker areas of foliage. Very common to see that in photos like this one. And you can scrape these out. That's another technique that's used, but I prefer to lift. I get a softer edge, not as distinct a line, and certainly not the hard edges and the scrapes into the paper itself. And having done that, one last pass with some of the darker colors. Again, burnt sienna mingled in there. This should still be wet enough to do that. Maybe down here I didn't put any of that darker color in. Some of the burnt sienna. A little of the ultramarine blue right over the top. That'll really darken it and neutralize it. And then with that brush, this is the same brush, a mixture actually of ultramarine and burnt sienna on the palette, I can use the corner now and start to put in some of these smaller branches. And I can connect where I just lifted and sort of indicated some lighter version of that trunk running up through the tree. I can use the darker color that I have on the brush now to connect it, connect the light areas with the darker areas. And create that sense of a tree trunk working up through that foliage, alternating areas of light with areas of shadow and shade. And again, using the corner very lightly to indicate some of the smaller branches that work its way out from the trunk. Looks like I've drawn an empty branch that's out here, has no leaves on it, and I can just bring that right out of the foliage and let it sort of stick out there a little bit. Again, quick and easy way to do trees using this one single brush, 3 really common simple colors, and getting a really, really nice effect in the end. And there it is. Again, doesn't take very long. Using this one single flat brush keeps us from getting too awfully fussy with the work that we're doing. It does allow us to get that organic, natural looking shape in those foliage masses in the tree itself. And by, again, using the corner, we can get some smaller, finer lines which help us show off some of the finer branches that we find on the tree.